talked about divestment plan of the government currently is Air India. Even as we look at ways of making Air India attractive to potential buyers, the real question truly is, why are we still supporting such a large number of inefficient government-run companies or PSUs that continue to make losses? Let's just take a look at some of our top loss-making PSUs or losers, whether it's India Post with losses of 15,000 crore rupees just in FY19, several others actually, BSNL at 14,000 crore rupees as the number 2 on that list, Air India of course at 8,400 crore rupees, MTNL at 3,398 crore rupees, and remember there's a plan for BSNL and MTNL to pump in more money. Companies like Hindustan Photo Film Manufacturers, which really are not relevant in this day and age, Bharat Coking Coal at a loss of about 1,400 crore rupees, Rashtriya Ispat Nigam. Is it time for a relook? Is it time to really pull the plug? As we speak of big reform moves needed to rescue the economy from a slowdown, maybe it's time to take a long, hard look at some of the PSUs, the exchequer that is you and me have been supporting so far. Because let's be honest, in terms of political mandate, there is nothing really stopping this government. It's all about will. So why don't we make the big move? To speak on this, I'm joined today by Rajan S. Katoch, former Secretary Heavy Industry, Dr. Govinda Bhattacharjee, Professor at IIPA, Sukumar Damle, Secretary of AITUC, and our very own Maithili Busramat, Consulting Editor at ET Now. Welcome to all of you and thank you for joining us. Mr. Katoch, let me start by asking your view on the proposition, really, we've put forward more than anything else. While we look at ways of rescuing our economy, we're asking for, tough, hard decisions, big, bold reforms. Isn't this a fair ask? Let's take a look at all these PSU banks, not just banks, but all public sector enterprises, and look at the ones which we need to cut the cord from.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with you with the proposition, and I'd just like to give you a little background.
Yes.
Between 2014, after this government came into office, we started the process in the Department of Heavy Industry. And in 2 years, we had identified 5 PSUs and structured an entire closure package, which then formed a basis for later guidelines which were issued on that. I'd like to, if you have a minute or so, detail that a little bit.
Yes.
These 5 PSUs were identified on the basis of the fact that they needed government support even for salary payments. So if the salary payments are cut off, they could not survive. And these were HMT watches, HMT Chinar watches, HMT bearings, Hindustan cables and Tungabhadra steel, all within my ministry. I had 32 PSUs and these 5 we took out for the first phase. The key issues which bogged down closures in the past were disposal of land and employees, retirement. And many court cases and inquiries had resulted from unsatisfactory resolution of these. So these were the issues we sought to resolve.
Yeah.
Now on land, the key issue was that any land which is alienated, no matter how transparently, if it goes to a private party, after a while the land value rises dramatically.
Yeah.
5 years later, some inquiry is set up and the people who were dealing with it are held responsible. So this meant that all my officers were very, very reluctant to deal with such cases. This was sorted out by putting in a guideline that land could only be alienated to central and state government entities. Which could be IITs, it could be space, it could be any department of the government or entity. On employees, the sticking point was that employees were being paid at pay scales which were about 20 years old. So whenever any package was devised, that package was devised on the basis of those pay scales which they never found suitable, and people would go to court and stall it. So here the point we made was that look, you got to make it worthwhile for them.
Yeah.
So a VRS package was devised which will be fixed at the highest pay scale which PSUs were getting anywhere. And it was a notional amount and led to quite a good package. And all these 5 PSUs, you'll be happy to know, employees accepted this.
Yeah.
And we did not have any issue with the unions, I think except for one particular unit, but all of them were closed and the employees retired peacefully. So I think to begin with, there is hope. A lot of homework has been done.
Okay.
And the guidelines have all been laid down on what works, what
Okay.
doesn't work.
That's
And that can be a good pointer for the future.
okay. So that's a good starting place. And thank you for that, Mr. Kadoj. You've actually laid out for our viewers' perspective of how this can be done. What about the pace? Maitri, let me come to you on that. Can we now not accelerate the pace, because it's a perfect storm in that sense. We have a mood for reform, an appetite for reform, and a capability of a government that can do it. It's not going to face at least any political problems, or can go past those. Why don't we?
Bit of a puzzle, Ramana, frankly, because, and it's not just loss making.
Absolutely.
The question
I
is for
think
Maitri, yes.
And I think it's not just a loss making PSU. I think even in the case of the profitable PSUs, wherever the government has no business to be in that business at all, why should the government be running an airline, running hotels, having a scooter manufacturing plant, drugs? There's no reason why government in any of these areas. The whole idea is that now that we have opened up, let us privatize these entities and let us have proper regulation. So it's not just loss-making entities. I would say even in the case of profitable PSUs.
We'll need to come back to you and get some of those points again. Let me come to Mr. Damle and get your point of view, Mr. Damle. Where do you stand in on this debate? We're not saying don't have government in business in crucial sectors, say like defense, other sectors where, or other businesses where you need that particular company to place and, actually do the job that governments need to do. We're not saying that shut all of those. What about the loss-making ones, which have been making losses consistently? Can't we start over there and shut those?
See, to begin with, can I say something?
Yes, the question's for you.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. This thought that government doesn't have business to be in business is a recent thing. When we took a loan from World Bank and IMF and all that, they brought in this, that government doesn't have any business to be in business. Prior to that, government was the one which initiated all the industrial activity here in India. And when government entities were there in service sectors also, it is because of our pharmaceuticals, for example, in the government sector, that produced all the basic drugs. And because of that, all the private companies profited. But they wouldn't go into the basic drugs. So this is the difference. When they find that they are not making enough profit, they shirk the private entities and it is left to the government. For example, BSNL. Right now it is, somebody said in the beginning that they are in a red spot. Yes, they are.
Yeah.
But when BSNL was formed, the assurances that were given that they are not being followed at all. BSNL is not given a level playing field. And then you say that they are making losses. This is unfair.
Okay.
When BSNL came in, all the rates of all the calls and all that dropped. Otherwise, private entities were fleecing us. Now they will again do that when everybody goes out and there is no competition. Wait and see what happens with Jio.
But, okay, I'm going to let Govinda Bhattacharjee respond to that. I just wanted to make a simple point that if any business, government run or otherwise, cannot survive in the face of competition, then its very existence needs to be looked at. Unfortunately, that's how businesses run. How do you see this, Dr. Govinda?
If you have level playing
Dr.
field,
Govinda,
yes.
the questions for Dr.
But
Govinda. Yes.
unfortunately,
I'm not clear. I mean, I'm not sure if I've heard you clearly, but let me answer the question as I have understood it. First, you see, to close down all the loss-making PSUs, that's clearly a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. The point is to put the things in proper perspective. We have to analyze the size of the problem. The first, you see, as of 2016-17, if I remember correctly, there were 444 central public sector undertakings in India. Besides some 6 statutory corporations and 192 deemed government companies, where the central government along with the state government or some other government company was holding more than 51% of stake. So we are dealing with huge size, more than 600 central public sector undertakings.
Yeah.
Now, of these 444 companies, about 212 companies earned a profit of 1.16 lakh crore rupees in 2016-17, where 157 companies incurred a loss of more than 31,000 crore. But if you look at the public sector as a whole, you will find that the accumulated losses of all the public sector companies, it more or less matches the total profit earned by them. That's one. So we are dealing with huge number, 157 companies, 157 plus companies, because we don't have the accounts of many of the companies. So we are dealing with about 170, 180 companies. That's a huge number. This is the first dimension of the problem. The second dimension is that the central public sector cannot be looked at in isolation.
Okay.
You see, people are talking only about the central public sector. Whenever we talk about the public sector, we talk only about the central public sector.
Yes.
We forget that there also exists a huge state public sector undertaking
Absolutely.
of size no less than that of the central sector. Like, I can allow me to quote some numbers. There are 1,136 state public sector undertakings that are actually working, besides 300 plus state PSUs which are not working. Some of them have not been working for several decades, 3-4 decades. Of these 1136 working state PSUs, only about 500 have earned some profit.
Yes.
But if you look at the overall results in 2016-17, they incurred a loss of over 84,000 rupees crores. That's a huge number, 84,000 rupees crore. Even if you talk about even if you talk only about the central PSUs, I know at least 77 of them have net worth completely eroded by their accumulated losses over the years. And the 10 of the top loss-making PSUs, led by Air India, BSNL, and MTNL, their total losses account for about 85% of the total losses of public sector companies.
Yes.
So the simple prescription would be to close down these 10 companies and try to manage the rest.
Okay.
But then, going by our experience with Air India,
Yes.
We know that it is easier said than done.
No, absolutely. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's going to happen with a snap of a finger. Where is the will? And why are we so slow? Maithili, I hope we have a better line for you, because I really want to come to you on this point. And the question is for Maithili. The kind of divestment we've seen in the last few years, which as you've often described on the show, is from one pocket to the other. HPCL, BPCL, and thoda sa, I would say farji kind of divestment, not really offloading stake. Can we not see more of this? And even the question that Dr. Govinda, the point he made about state-run PSUs. Now, you now have a BJP-led government in over 20-21 states. If there is a will, there's definitely a way right now.
I would think so, because as you said, what we really need to have
There's a problem of understanding what you are saying, because of the.
What we really need to have is not just the loss-making PSUs, but also the profitable PSUs. There is no reason why government should be in the business of running an airline, running a telecom service, running hotels. So I think government should exit all areas where they are not required at all, where the private sector can play as good a role provided we have good regulation. And we've seen successful disinvestment. We've seen it in the case of Maruti, we've seen it in the case of Hindustan Zinc, Balco. So there's no reason why the government should not do it now. Not just to raise revenue, but simply because what the private sector can do better than government, the private sector should be allowed to do. Government's role should be limited to being that of an enabler. And I think this is the best moment for the government, because the BJP has shown that it has the courage it can take the bull by the horns, and there is no reason why it should not. But let me also add one small clarification of caveat, Tamanna,
Yeah.
that some of these PSUs, they have been run to the ground by deliberate action of past governments maybe. Air India has been a classic example of a very good airline which was almost done to death by the previous civil aviation minister under the UPA regime. So let us also not forget the contribution that many of these PSUs has made and will perhaps continue to make if they will be allowed to function at arm's length distance from the government. Unfortunately, that has not happened. Very often the PSUs have been asked to bail out private sector companies,
Yes.
as we're seeing not just in the case of banks, but now with say NBCC being asked to take over stalled housing projects. So let's not point a finger only at the PSUs. Very often they're more sinned against than sinning. But yes, government should get out of areas where it has no business to be in.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's not PSUs have willfully, or those who work in public sector units are willfully, not working hard enough or ruining the business. It is because they are government companies and then they're not run even with the basic premise of making a profit. Sometimes they're employment generating units. And let's be honest, that's part of the big problem of really curtailing them and going forward. But Mr. Rajan, I want your perspective on a point that Mr. Damle made earlier in the show about how some of these companies perform the task of actually putting forward government policy. And if they don't do it, who is going to do it? Because private companies, for example, may not, if it's a private airline, may not want to have routes in far-flung areas that like an Air India would do. Or if it is priority sector lending, as far as public sector banks are concerned, for example, they may not want to do it like private sector banks will do. Private sector banks, in fact, are the biggest vehicle of government policy right now. So how do you put that in perspective when there is a demand of cutting our losses?
Yeah. I think is partially it's okay in the sense that all these companies were set up.
Hello.
I mean, at the time when they were set up in the 50s and 60s, it was the need of the time. At that time, there was no industry in all these areas. From my experience, I can talk about HMT. Before HMT, there was no machine tool, no light engineering industry in India. After that, it has actually catalyzed this whole industry. The engineers from HMT have gone on to set up their own businesses. Today, there is a thriving engineering sector. So, I mean, they had a purpose at a particular point of time. Today, that purpose has to be seen in the light of the time we are in today. The other thing, if I may just reinforce the point I was making earlier, which is that in the last term of this government, all the nitty-gritty work has been done, a foundation has been laid, a model has been worked out by which these closures can happen successfully without friction. And now it's only a question of the decisions that to decide which ones to close, and they can be done. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, that's an important point. And Dr. Govinda, if you can hear me, let me come to that. The groundwork has been laid. Do you think the government will bite the bullet over the next few months? Also, we come back to the same question that if you're going to offload equity, right now markets are not in the best of health. You need investor appetite. Is this a good time? That question will also keep plaguing us.
You see, I'm not very sure if I've heard you clearly, but let me approach the problem from a different perspective. First, you see, it is wrong to say that the private sector is always efficient and the public sector is always inefficient. There are many examples among the public sector where the companies have excelled and made performed much better than the private sector companies when autonomy was given to them, when an enabling environment was created for them. There are many examples. 4 of our companies are in the Fortune 500 list. 4 of our central PSUs, where there are only 3 private sector companies which are in the Fortune 500 list. This is one problem. You see, it is not that India is the only country that has faced the problem of loss-making companies. Many other countries, even among the developed world, in UK, in Western Europe, in Scandinavia, even in Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, they have also faced this problem. But they have been able to turn their companies around by altering their ownership structure. You see, the state is the owner, but the ownership functions can be exercised in different ways. in the OECD countries, in most OECD countries, they follow a model called the centralized model, where a single body, either a ministry, maybe Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Industry, or a holding company, exercises the ownership functions. Now, that establishes a clear line of accountability from the enterprise to the government, while shielding the enterprise from interference by the government,
Okay.
because the holding company is in between. Now, one of the examples. Let me give you some examples. One of the most successful examples of this centralized model is a company called Temasek in Singapore.
Yeah.
Singapore, after its independence in '65, has been pursuing the economic growth by holding stakes in different government companies, including startups. But after a decade, they found out that many of these companies had accumulated losses and had turned into loss-making organizations. At that point of time, in 1974, the Singapore government established Temasek as a holding company,
Yes.
and handed over the stakes of all the government companies in that holding company, and gave it independence. That was a model that turned around many of the loss-making companies into profitable companies. In fact, some of them become global leaders like Singapore Airlines, Singtel, or Singapore Power. Now in India, there's a panel headed by Mr. S.K. Rungta, if I remember correctly. He was an ex chairman of the SAIL. That panel, gave its recommendation sometime say 2011 or 2012, proposing to create a single holding company for all the PSUs. But that recommendation was never acted upon. It was much like the Temasek model, but neither the UPA government nor the NDA government implemented any of its recommendations. Who would like to let go of the cash cows? The PSUs are, after all, the cash cows. Now, for the successful working of the model,
Right.
a clear separation of the roles of the government as the owner, as the regulator, and as the policymaker, that is a sine qua non. Now, Temasek model, effectively means this: the government
Absolutely.
lays down the policy and keeps itself at an arm's length distance. The Temasek as the owner, it manages the assets of the companies.
No, that's
It makes the investment and disinvestment globally.
Yes.
And most important, it employs it appoints the board of directors from a pool of professional experts.
No, in
not
fact-
like
in
us,
fact,
where a generalist broker is put in charge of the company.
Yeah, no.
And thirdly,
I'm
they
sorry,
create a regulatory
I'm
structure
sorry,
also.
I'm
There's a
interrupting you there
regulator
because of
called
a
ACRA.
paucity of time, Mr. Govinda, and I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I think the Temasek example is a very important one. We should go forward on that. Mr. Damle, just a quick point from you, because what we've seen so far, and this was a report recently, that LIC has actually invested 10 lakh crores in ailing PSU since 2014. The investment from LIC is actually increased. We are pumping in more money. Now, in some cases, you could try and turn around these companies and their ownership. In some cases, you just have to shut shop. HMT is one example. Mr. Katoch has been telling us about it. Don't you think it's time at least these are identified, Mr. Damle?
Listen, this whole argument is around loss-making companies. What I'm looking at is, I'll give an example of transport, state transport. Now, these are generally loss-making, yes. But will the private players enter that? As you rightly said earlier, that Air India might go to places where private players may not. The same thing is happening right now in road transport. Road transport goes to far off places and gives service. Private bus owners don't go there. So it is not a question of just looking at loss making or private this thing, whether service is given, and we require that service. That service is given by only the government companies. I gave an example of IDPL. Earlier it made basic drugs, and nobody else did. That Hathi Committee report of 1973-74
All right.
gave instances of private companies making 14,000% profit. Now, is that good business practice, or is it extortion of people? So I think that you shouldn't look at just a profit and loss making thing. The service needed for us, for our people, is required.
No,
And
absolutely.
it is we who have the money put in the banks, and we should have the say how to use it. Like, for example, these bank mergers, that is going to take away all the service of banking from a whole lot of villages. Is that what we are looking for, just for profitability of banks?
I don't
And
even know if it's going to
profitability of
lead
banks
to.
is eroded
I don't
because
even
of,
know if it's going to lead to
NP accounts.
profitability. I'm absolutely out of
Not
time,
government.
but I'm still going to take a last quick word from Maithili, because you've spoken about bank mergers and she's had strong views on that. I have little time, Maithili, but if you could just wrap up the point on bank mergers and how we can take a bit of a nuanced approach to this.
Because bank merger, I think, are very ill-advised and is not going to serve any purpose at all, particularly since it comes at a very inopportune time, at a time when the economy is barely showing a few green shoots. Unnecessarily, a lot of the top management time will be spent on trying to work through the mergers at a time when they could have been spent, in terms of increasing credit, now that they have recapitalization gone. So I think a lot of mistakes have been made as far as the public sector enterprises are concerned. We need to correct that, and basic rule is government should get out of all the businesses that the private sector can do, provided there is good, efficient regulation to see that the private sector does not take customers and consumers for a ride.
And absolutely, it's not like that regulation doesn't exist or isn't implemented and the private sector has a free run. So we're going to have to take a nuanced approach, but the time is ripe now to pull the plug. All the stars have aligned, so to speak. The decision can be made, and maybe we should take those tough decisions, especially when we're in the middle of an economic slowdown and looking for big boosts and big reforms. Hopefully, someone is listening. Thank you so much for joining us on the show this evening. That's all the time I have on the India Development Debate, but we'll be back tomorrow, so do tune in.